is the one that I know well, and it's the one I'm going to speak about. So the Respect Young People's program, 18 sessions over 12 weeks. So it's a really intensive program, but it's a systemic program. And the beauty of it, and the thing that I think works best, is that it works with the young person and it works with the parent. So it doesn't work with the parent in terms of a parent program. Parent programs are not for this. You don't want to say to a child, I'm putting mum on a parent program because she's not good at parenting. If there's this dynamic, imagine, that's really unhelpful. But what we're doing in the parenting stuff is we're helping the parent to de-escalate situations. We're helping them to rebuild their bonds. And so there's some work there about helping them to look at the strengths. That's the first part of it. Getting them to realize as a family, they've got a lot of stuff to put against this problem of CAPVA. And then it breaks out a little bit into individual sessions, getting to know the young person, getting to know the parent, etc. There's a family agreement, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because I think that's one of the mainstays of the program, and it's something that's reviewed all the way through. And then we look at how they were parented in terms of the parent work and how that might be impacting on their views and relationship with the child. We do some work with the young person around anger management. It's much more important to do that with young people than it is to do with perpetrators. It's not got the same connotations in relation to justification, because actually we know a lot of these children are traumatized and struggling with anger management. So it's important to teach that skill. And of course, their brains are not developed fully yet as well. So there's all of that stuff. And then we do some cognitive behavioral work. The video conversation is a restorative justice piece. So that goes throughout the program. It starts at session 5 with the young person. We use guided questions. The young person responds to those questions, and then we show the video to mum or dad. They get to see the video. We ask them some guided questions, and then they respond and send a video message to their young person. And it goes back and forth like that for a little while. So there's another session, and then the young person gets the final say. And that is a beautiful piece of work that I find really rewarding and did when I was in practice. It's very emotional and really heartfelt, and you get a lot of insight and apologies from both sides. Mums apologising for the situations that the child has been in, the children apologising for the harm they've caused. So it's a really, really nice piece of work. And actually, when we did a bit of research in Newcastle, the things that came out the most often as the most beneficial parts of the program were the family agreement and the video conversation. And both parents and children said that, which you might be surprised at, because getting children to do stuff on video can be a little bit intimidating. But generally, by the time it comes to that part, they're going with it. So the family agreement is basically a container for making sure that the risky and unsafe behaviours are contained within it, and that we think then of consequences and maybe some rewards for helpful behaviours. And it's done in a really collaborative way with the young person. And it helps them they help to think about the rewards and consequences. And you'll be really surprised, and the parents are always really surprised to see how invested the kids are in making sure this family agreement works. It's really validating to the parents. And so mum might say, right, well, if you're violent, I think maybe we'll take the Wi-Fi away for 24 hours. And the kid will be like, well, no, we could do that, but I've got unlimited data on my phone. That's not going to be effective. That's not going to work. We need to do something else. And so that's really validated. And sometimes they're way harsher. And then some mum gets this idea that actually, or dad, that actually the child does want to restore that dynamic, that she maybe doesn't want to be in charge in the way that they've been before. So it's really validating. And it only focuses on the risky and unsafe behaviours. And what we're trying to do is to stabilise the environment, to make it safe, because actually when a child's engaging in this behaviour, they're making themselves unsafe, and they're actually, they're in a traumatic environment of their own making. Is it their own making? But it's, you know what I mean? It's their behavior, but it's traumatizing to them. So we need to make that safe. It reduces the likelihood of harsh and inconsistent consequences coming from parents who are struggling to cope. So it removes that. And often before we've intervened, we'll see parents going harsh, they can see that an incident's going to happen. I remember a mum was going to get hit over the head by an iPad, and she went really harsh with that consequence, because she was trying to prevent the behavior from happening. But we need to make it consistent and agreed, and that works much better. The child knows what's coming. They know if I do X, Y will happen. It's so reassuring to children who've been in chaotic situations or traumatic situations. The consequences are created to help, about natural consequences. They're logical and they're not to harm. So it's not about punishing children, it's about agreement. And yeah, that's not okay. Naming behaviors is unacceptable, and making sure there's a consequence. It's also taught alongside a timeout strategy, which is a strategy to help the young person manage their emotions in that state. So the mum can say to the child, okay, I think, it's getting out of hand. I'm going to give you a warning. Do you want to take time out? Or the child can say, I need to take time out. And they will go through a process of calming for 20 minutes in order to get that central nervous system, fight or flight system, back down again, so that they can re-enter the situation and have a conversation about what's going on. Okay. And this is just a little therapeutic needs hierarchy, just to show that actually at the bottom there is really important for children to be feeling safe emotionally and physically before we do the other work with them. So this family agreement is a really important part of making sure that we create stability, consistency, and safety in the home before we then go on to do some of the later, more cognitive work with them. We can't do any of that stuff if the family are frightened or dysregulated all of the time. So yeah, is everyone finished with taking photos of that before I flick over? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read a letter from somebody who was involved in the RIP program. It was actually a colleague of mine, a social worker, who did the RIP program with this family. And to give some context to the family situation, there were twin boys, 15, and they were really violent and aggressive. Mum was struggling to cope, and there was a 5-year-old boy in the family. The 5-year-old boy was at risk of being removed, and the letter for proceedings at court had been issued by the local authority. It was that close. He was going into care potentially if things didn't change. And so the social worker thought, I've just been trained in RIP. Let's give it a shot. What else can I do? And so the experience that Mum had made her, so motivated to really try and reach out to other families that we were working with in order to kind of encourage them to give the RIP a try, because she'd had such a positive experience. So I'm going to read it out to you, so don't worry, because it's in her handwriting, but I think that's a nice touch, isn't it? So you won't be able to read it, but I can. So, life before RIP. Waking up on a morning before the kids, dreading them waking up, not knowing what the first kickoff was going to be about, or how many battles and fights were going to happen that day. And then RIP when it first started. This isn't going to work. Feeling nothing is going to change. Pointless, but I'll try it anyway. During, learning things about your kids, yourself as parents, different techniques to cope with things or battles that might happen. Expect hiccups and hitting brick walls, but keep in mind those changes that have already started to happen. Minimal to no physical fighting. It's gone from 4 to 5 per day to 1 I can recall in the past 6 months. Trust the program. Start with an open mind. Yes, have your doubts. Write them down if needs be. Never in a million years did I think that this program would work for us. But I come here and tell you in person that it does. Small steps make big changes. Starting the program, you have nothing to lose, so go for it. Changes don't happen overnight, but they do happen. Last year, my home was smashed up over 20 times, and since the RIP, never, not once. So, yeah. So that's that family. And just so that people have closure around that family, the child remains in home with Mum, and it's 3 years since. And older boy has gone off traveling, the other one remains at home, and things are much, much better. So there was a happy ending. Okay, questions? Works around the room, I hope. We all got a little emotional. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much. That was really insightful. And you were talking a lot about the prevalence of domestic abuse in the backstories of these young people. How do you mitigate for the absent parent, so the abusive parent? So you talked a lot about the work with the non-abusive parent and the child using harmful behaviour. What happens when there is still an abusive parent and post-separation abuse, and how does that impact on the work?
It does impact on the work, and what we have to do quite often, especially if there's still access and the child is moving from one family to the other, oftentimes we have to be really creative about the family agreement and when consequences start and when they finish. If we can, and it's safe to do so, we'll engage that absent parent and try and get them to agree the consequences and to follow on so that there's consistency. So, and when that happens, that works really nicely. If we can get, it's generally dad, but if we can get dad involved in agreeing to that, that's perfect. Same thing happens with grandparents. Sometimes we have to pull grandparents in to the family agreement as well, because they can less malevolently undermine usually the family agreement. But it is something that we're actually looking at more closely, because you're right, it can be really difficult for mum when there is somebody out there who's telling the child they don't need to listen, or that whatever mum says in that house doesn't need to happen there. It's going to have an impact. We just get really very kind of creative about when consequences start and happen. That's the best way I've found of addressing that. So the child doesn't run off to dad and then the consequence never happens. It comes back afterwards. It's not ideal, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. My name is Declan Coogan from the West of Ireland. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I'm really excited by the Respect programme.
Oh, great.
Can you tell us whether it's group work or couple work and young person's work, or a mixture of both? So
it can be both. There are sessions to do group work with young people. In the UK, it's generally run as an individual programme. So usually the young person does sessions and the parent does sessions individually, and then they come back together for the family agreement in that joint session. And also the first session, which is a meeting the family aside from the issue, they do that joint as well, where the parent says lots of positive things, which really helps the young person to feel it's relationship building. But yeah, then they separate out. The individual sessions can be run as group work sessions with young people. It has some, you need to think about then in terms of, your age ranges in risk. And also, I know Olivia mentioned this when we were talking about peers yesterday, that impacted teenagers and that peer thing and how much they're going to collude with each other is something that needs to be managed in groups. But the sessions are written as group work sessions as well. So if you wanted to do it like that. We're also in the process at Respect of doing some work with parent groups, because I think there's some real lovely stuff that could be done there in terms of parent support and parents feeling like they're not alone with this stuff and being able to have a space to talk about their difficulties without shame and stigma, which is a huge issue for these parents. So yeah, I hope that's answered your question. Great.
We have questions from some online participants. The first, how do families and young people get referred? And also, is there any research about children alienating from the abused parent?
So the first bit, it was about referrals. Where do children get referred? So it very much depends. Usually we help. We've done a lot of work with local authorities and we'll help them with their referral routes. It very much depends who's funded the intervention and where that comes from, but the referral routes could come from school. And I think, when I was in practice in Gateshead, a lot of our referrals came from schools. They are really keen to refer in because they can see the impact it's having on the young person's school life and attendance. So that's a really nice way of kind of linking in with schools. It does sometimes come in through the police as well. So they might come in and put child concern notifications. And so, for instance, we're doing work in Durham at the moment, and their system is that the child concern will highlight that it's CAPVA, and then that will come into their MASH, the multi-agency safeguarding hub, and then they will look at that referral and then hopefully allocate out into their early help team where they've got RIP practitioners trained. But it very much depends on how it's been implemented and developed. For instance, in Cambridge, they've got a system where they're very closely linked with the police, which is actually working really, really well. But yeah, it depends. And what was the second part of the question? Oh, sorry, you're having to run all the way up the stairs now. Alienation, something about alienation.
Is there research about adult children alienating from the abused parent?
About adult children alienating? Not as far as I know. There is research on, it's just starting to have some research on adult children being abusive towards their parents. I don't know if that's where she was, the question author was coming from. And actually, what I didn't say before is I've taken out the age range in the definition, because we used to kind of think about it in terms of age ranges, because it definitely happens before adolescence. We see children who are really, really young engaging in this. But the important thing in relation to this question is that it completely doesn't necessarily stop when a child's 18. And when I was managing a domestic abuse team, we had a lot of cases that would come to MARAC, the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference, where adult children were being very violent and abusive towards their parents. And those were some of the most difficult cases to manage, because you know, the way of conferences and things like that, it's like, let's separate them out, and if they leave, all of that will be, you know, really helpful. But obviously, often in intimate relationships, people don't want that, but definitely in the dynamic between, you know, child and parent violence, then they really don't want to lose their parents, and the parents don't want to lose the children. So it's an under-researched area, but I don't know anything about children and alienating parents. Yes, we have a question over here.
Hi, Justine.
Hi.
And do you want to say, can you say anything about the evidence base? Is there any, you know, in terms of, is there anything about, does it work, and how are you measuring outcomes?
Yeah, I was expecting that question. So thank you, Neil. So basically, there was a big pilot study when the RIP was first created in 2016. And over 500 families participated in it. We used strength and difficulties questionnaires pre and post with children and parents. In the parent scales, there was improvement in all of them. In the child scales, improvement in the majority. The one that wasn't was peer relationships. And statistically significant improvements on parent and child for conduct, which we hoped to see, thank goodness, and also mental health. So statistically significant improvements in both of those areas, which is seems to demonstrate that it is indeed working. At the moment, we have a really small project, like I was saying, in Cambridge, a very tiny sample, but really promising results from that. We'll keep going with it until we've got a bigger sample. But at the moment, there was 15 in the sample. For 14 families, there was 100% reduction in police call-outs, and a 92% reduction in the remaining family. But that family, prior to RIP being involved, had called out the police 66 times. So still, like, and obviously it doesn't mean that it's completely gone, but like, that's a really promising suggestion, isn't it? The police call-outs are reducing to that degree. And that's an estimated saving of 325,000 to the criminal justice system. So your RIP intervention pays for itself. Interestingly, missing incidents were reduced for all 15 of the sample as well. And 3 of those children had been involved in the Operation Make Safe, which was the police multi-agency forum on CSE and CCE. So to have that as a secondary outcome is amazing and really useful actually when I'm talking to practitioners, because quite often they feel like, should we be doing the RIP because the kids are involved in CSE and CCE and where do we start and all of that kind of stuff. But I think what's happening is when you help to restore that family dynamic and make it a pleasant place to be, then you're encouraging parents to have more control of the children and to, you know, be able to set boundaries and things like that. You will start to see some of that other stuff like CSE and CCE being better managed and children wanting to remain in the family home and stuff. So it's really exciting, that new research. So hopefully the figures, as the numbers grow, continue to say the same thing.
I'm sorry, we're really tricky now. Just what CSR, I mean, it's not for all.
Sorry. So it's child sexual exploitation and also child criminal exploitation. So what we're seeing suggests that the RIP is having an impact on some of that stuff as well, which is great because we know that CAPVA is really strongly linked to those things as well. So.